When I decided to read my first Spanish book, El Camino Cristo, in June 2017, I really didn't understand the process of how people make the transition from doing a beginner course like Duolingo to starting reading books in their target language. I want to share with you my mistakes and lessons I learned reading my first Spanish book. My name is Franklin, and this is first1000hours.com. Don't give up on your language learning marathon. You can make it. You can make it through your first 1,000 hours. One of the hobbies I like to do from time to time is to go on YouTube and find out how people learn other languages. For example, I like to go to a YouTube channel called Reto Bilingüe. It's a channel that's all in Spanish, and it's dedicated to providing resources to help Hispanics raise their children bilingual or multilingual. And to me, that's a win-win situation because I get to learn about language learning strategies, and I also get to learn more Spanish. I also watch videos in English as well, and one of them I saw was a video called How to Overcome Obstacles to Learn English. And this was done by Rafael Leon. He is someone that is a native Portuguese speaker, and he has learned English to a very high level. And he said something very interesting about language learning. He said, language is just like a puzzle. If you don't put the right pieces in the right places, they are not going to fit in. But how do you solve a puzzle? Trying, making mistakes, trying again, recalling the previous errors, looking for patterns, and using the logic to see what are the ideal new pieces to put in next. And to me, reading helps the language jigsaw puzzle come together. For example, we might watch something on YouTube in our target language and we might say to ourselves, wow, people are speaking too fast. I'm not going to understand what they're saying. But reading is like the decoder to understand what people are saying because you can go at your own pace. You can read things in your target language very fast or you can read very slow. But reading is going to help make what people are saying in your target language comprehensible, especially if the language that you're trying to learn is similar to your native language or if it's similar to a language that you have learned in the past. Also with reading, you can spend more time understanding sentence structure and grammar through recognizing patterns. So you might not know the grammatical rules in your target language, but over time, as you continue to read, you will understand what sounds right or wrong as time progresses. For example, even though I am a native speaker of English, I can't explain all of the grammatical rules, but I know what sounds right and what sounds wrong. El Camino Cristo was the first Spanish book I read all the way through to help me understand Spanish. And some of the reasons I chose El Camino Cristo was because I liked the theme of El Camino Cristo. It was a small book, it didn't have that many pages, and it didn't seem very intimidating to me. And the book was all in Spanish. I picked up the book and I started reading it, and every time I came to an unfamiliar word, I would write the English translation above that word. Honestly, it was a rare thing for me not to have to look up a word in every single sentence. And I think my record in the whole El Camino Cristo was not having to look up words in 7 consecutive sentences. From the beginning, I knew that the reading level of El Camino Cristo was higher than my own personal level in Spanish, but I was okay with that. I could go slow and at my own pace, and I was okay with the challenge. One of the mistakes that I did early on in reading El Camino Cristo was that I used a paper dictionary. And I did that because I didn't want to have a lot of dependence on Google Translate. Google Translate is a powerful tool. It's a wonderful tool, but I knew in the past that I had used Google Translate to translate things from English to Spanish or Spanish to English, and I just had full dependence on Google Translate. I didn't think about how Google Translate came to the conclusion that it did in translating the way it did, and I didn't want to just have so much dependence on technology that I could not really function outside of Google Translate. And so using a paper dictionary was my attempt to really think on my own. But as I continued to read, and I read at such a snail's pace, I realized that I needed to use Google Translate so I could read the book faster. I devised a way of how I could use Google Translate and still think at the same time. I want to share with you an audio clip that I recorded January 12th, 2018 about this subject.
I am doing the method of trying to read a sentence by myself If I can't understand the sentence, then I use Google Translate and I just translate one sentence. And then I try to understand the sentence structure and all of that. So it's a little tedious, but at the same time, I do understand more.
I had a PDF of El Camino Cristo, so when I came to an unfamiliar word or phrase, I would try to figure it out on my own. If I couldn't, I would copy it from my PDF and paste it into Google Translate to get the English translation. I would spend some time trying to see why Google Translate gave me that translation. Then I would write the English word or phrase in my paperback book. My second mistake in reading El Camino Cristo is I wanted to know everything perfectly before I moved on to the next chapter. And I think we can do this with other things. We can say, I don't want to watch programs on YouTube in Spanish because I don't understand everything. I don't want to go to a Spanish church because I don't understand everything. I have to understand everything 100% before I move on to another activity. I think that's very detrimental to the language learning experience. Language is so complex, and when we limit ourselves to just understanding one small aspect of language 100%, then we stop growing as much as we could have. I had multiple copies of El Camino Cristo. I would read another copy of El Camino Cristo that had no English notes in it, and I would try to read that chapter perfectly. And if I could read that chapter perfectly, then I felt that it would be time to go on to the next chapter. And that was a hindrance of progress because eventually I came to the realization that if I spent a lot of time reviewing old material in Spanish, then my mind would have less of a challenge. Therefore, I wouldn't grow as much in Spanish. I do sometimes cover old material for fun, but not as a rule. However, I've come to believe in the principle that quantity is what produces quality. I think one of the best ways to illustrate how quantity equals quality in language learning is from Tom's testimony of how he learned English. Tom is a Polish native that is a blogger on a website called Anti-Moon, which emphasizes reading and listening to learn languages. Tom's English level is so high that sometimes he is confused for a native English speaker. On Anti-Moon's website, he said he read approximately 60 pages of written English and listened to 6 hours of spoken English per week for 3 years. What if Tom decided to only read 10 new pages of English and listen to only 1 new hour of English and review it over and over each month? Would he make the same amount of progress? I don't think so. Before we can ever hope to reach the level of quality that we desire in our target language, we first have to be committed to spending a lot of time with various new interactions with our target language. My third mistake was that reading in Spanish wasn't my daily habit for the majority of time from June to December 2017. I found out that there was a big difference between reading El Camino Cristo whenever I felt like it versus reading it systematically. Without a systematic plan, if I read El Camino Cristo at all, it was usually on a Sunday, and I would read around 3 or 4 pages on that day. However, I came up with a better plan. The following is an audio clip from January 12th, 2018.
I have started and I have stopped reading El Camino Cristo, but I'm starting again. And my goal is to read 5 pages a week. So that's basically 1 page, 5 days in the week. And I believe I can read this book systematically. And if I do that, I should be able to finish El Camino Cristo at the end of March.
It took me approximately 30 minutes a day to read 1 page of El Camino Cristo. Here's what I said about my plan to read El Camino Cristo in bite-sized chunks on January 26, 2018.
I was able to finish my Spanish goals of reading at least 5 pages in the week, 5 times a day. This week I only did 5 pages, but hey, out of the 2 weeks that I have tried to do this, now I've been able to read 11 pages, which is progress. Maybe one day it doesn't seem like a lot of progress, but I think looking at it over a 2 weeks period of time, it seems like a lot, especially considering how I was doing before.
I usually read El Camino Cristo in the morning, and I even had a bedtime to conquer reading this book. My goals were small but attainable, and I was able to finish reading El Camino Cristo in April 2018. This book was 94 pages long. How many books can you read in your target language in a year? If you put your goals in bite-sized chunks, you're about 5 months or less away from finishing reading your first book in your target language. I'm assuming that the book is 100 pages and that your target language is similar to a language that you already know. If you read 1 page of that book 5 days in a week, you will finish reading it in 20 weeks or 5 months. That means you have the potential of reading 2 books or more in a year. You might be saying to yourself that reading that amount of pages is a lot less than what Tom from Antimoon read in 3 years. However, if you make reading in your target language a habit instead of a random activity, you're going to read more. The more you read, the faster you're going to be able to read. So I think you'll be surprised at how much you will read during your first 1,000 hours if reading is a habit. Before I end, I just want to let you know that I'm going to include some links in the show notes of this podcast to short videos I did in Spanish about El Camino Cristo at the end of 2017. Also, I'm looking forward to sharing with you how I read even faster when I was reading my second Spanish book, Palabras de Vida del Gran Maestro, in a future podcast. My name is Franklin, and this is First1000hours.com. Don't give up on your language learning marathon. You can make it. You can make it through your first 1,000 hours.